Imagine, you're driving a 40-ton truck down the
Yeah.
highway.
Right.
The radio is playing, the road is perfectly clear, and suddenly you blink and realize you have absolutely zero memory of the last 10 miles. I mean, your brain simply turned off.
Yeah, it's a terrifying thought.
Totally. And in the trucking industry, that is a known quantifiable danger. But what happens when that exact same mental blackout occurs in a professional whose entire job is to, protect vulnerable children from harm?
That's the thing. The threat doesn't announce itself with some flashing red dashboard light. It just creeps in, quietly compromising the very people who are tasked with keeping a watchful eye.
Which is exactly why we're here today. Welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission is to explore this really fascinating document titled, What a DSL Can Learn from a Long-Haul Truck Driver.
Such a unique comparison.
It really is. And just to set the stage for you listening, a DSL is a designated safeguarding lead. So that's a professional working in an educational or pastoral setting who holds the responsibility for student well-being, child protection, and crisis management.
Basically, it is a relentlessly heavy job.
Yeah, to say the least.
And the central premise of this source text is that in these high-stakes roles, the greatest risk isn't actually a spectacular public breakdown.
Right.
The real danger, like the mechanism that actually allows disasters to unfold, is found in these tiny, invisible lapses in concentration.
Just slipping under the radar.
Exactly. It's the subtle erosion of professional judgment that happens when someone is just completely depleted.
I want you, listening right now, to just think about a time you were pushing through a brutally stressful week. You know the kind.
Oh, yeah.
You were probably running on fumes, skipping lunches. But if a colleague asked how you're doing, you would have just waved them off and said, "Oh, I'm fine. I'm handling it."
Because you genuinely believed you were.
Exactly. You were convinced you were functioning normally. So we're going to explore why that feeling of normalcy during periods of high stress is actually a massive liability.
And what a safeguarding professional can learn from a long-haul trucker to prevent catastrophic failures in judgment.
Because taking something highly abstract, like emotional fatigue, and mapping it onto the very physical, measurable world of freight transport, it just gives us a brilliant framework to understand human limitations.
It really makes the invisible visible.
Okay, let's unpack this, because highway hypnosis explains the physical side of this phenomenon beautifully. Your hands are on the steering wheel, your eyes are open, but the analytical part of your brain is just offline.
Completely checked out.
Right. But a safeguarding lead isn't staring at a white line on asphalt. They are looking at complex human behavior. I mean, they're reading case files, they're interviewing students.
Yeah.
How does a brain go offline when it is actively evaluating child welfare?
Well, it comes down to the biological limits of sustained vigilance.
Okay.
In the trucking industry, a microsleep lasts only a few seconds. If you're sitting on your couch and you experience a microsleep, your head nods and you drop the TV remote.
Right. No harm done. You just wake up and rewind the show.
Exactly. But behind the wheel of a truck moving at 60 miles an hour, those 3 seconds become catastrophic just because of the sheer speed and the weight of the responsibility.
Wow. Yeah.
So the source explains that in safeguarding, the equivalent of a microsleep is a momentary lapse in continuous awareness.
And it's a lapse that the professional doesn't even feel happening, right? I mean, it's not like they are actively deciding to look the other way.
No, not at all. The erosion of judgment is biological, not moral.
That's a huge distinction.
It is. The source highlights a concept it calls a professional truth, and it cuts right to the core of how we misunderstand fatigue.
What's the truth?
That exhausted professionals still care deeply. Their intent remains pure. They haven't stopped wanting to protect children. But biologically, their cognitive load has maxed out.
Which means they process risk less effectively.
Exactly.
You know, that distinction between intent and capacity completely changes how we evaluate failure. Because we tend to look at a missed warning sign and just assume the person simply didn't care enough to act.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. We jump straight to blaming their character, when in reality, the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain responsible for complex problem-solving, empathy, evaluating nuance, it's an absolute energy hog.
It takes a lot of calories to run.
Right. So when an individual is chronically exhausted, the brain literally conserves fuel by routing information away from the prefrontal cortex.
Wow. So what does that actually look like for a DSL in practice?
Well, it looks like shortened patience with a student who is acting out. It looks like missing incredibly subtle behavioral shifts.
Like what?
Say a child is slightly quieter than usual, or maybe they flinch at a certain word. A rested brain flags that as an anomaly requiring investigation.
But an exhausted brain.
An exhausted brain, operating in energy-saving mode, just registers it as a normal teenage moodiness and moves right on.
Oh, man. Or I guess it could be the delayed decision to escalate a concern.
Yes, exactly.
Because subconsciously, the professional knows that flagging an issue will trigger like a mountain of paperwork, 3 meetings, and a really difficult phone call with parents.
And the brain just lacks the glucose and energy to handle that load.
So it rationalizes waiting another day to see if the problem just resolves itself.
Which means by the time the danger actually becomes obvious to the broader team, as the text puts it, the vehicle may already be drifting off course.
That is chilling.
Safeguarding failure is rarely about a bad person doing a bad job. It is fundamentally about depleted capacity.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, though, because I want to push back on this a little bit.
Okay, go for it.
If I'm a DSL and I know my students' baselines perfectly, shouldn't that make me faster at spotting anomalies? I mean, it feels counterintuitive that knowing a kid well or knowing a school's systems inside and out would make me less safe.
It does seem backward, doesn't it?
Yeah. Shouldn't familiar routines help mitigate that cognitive load you just mentioned?
What's fascinating here is that you would naturally assume familiarity breeds efficiency. But the source actually highlights the trap of what they call autopilot behavior.
Autopilot.
Yeah, think back to the truck driver. When a driver is navigating a treacherous, winding mountain road in a rainstorm, their adrenaline is spiking. They are hyper-focused, taking in every single data point.
Because they have to be or they'll crash.
Right. But when they hit a long, straight, incredibly familiar stretch of highway on a sunny day, statistical data shows that is actually when they're most likely to crash.
Because the brain tells you, hey, we've done this a million times, you can just relax.
Exactly. The human brain consumes roughly 20% of our body's energy. To save fuel, it turns repeated actions into neurological shortcuts.
Ah, so it shifts control from the analytical centers to the habit centers.
Like the basal ganglia, yeah. Familiar roads reduce a driver's alertness and create this dangerous false confidence that nothing will happen today because, well, nothing happened yesterday.
Think about your own job for a second, listeners. Just think about how many routine emails you skimmed today, just because you assumed you knew what they said before you even finished the first sentence.
We all do it.
That is the exact autopilot mechanism we are talking about here. You didn't stop caring about your job. Your brain just optimized for speed over deep comprehension.
And the source translates this perfectly to the DSL role. Familiar students, repeated daily routines, long-standing pastoral systems. They reduce a professional's curiosity.
You stop asking why a student is behaving a certain way because you think you already know the answer.
Precisely. If a student you've worked with for 4 years starts acting out, your autopilot brain bypasses the analytical effort and just says, oh, that's just Sam being Sam.
Wow.
You rely on historical assumptions rather than fresh, objective analysis. The text explicitly states that repetition creates complacency, especially in the most experienced staff.
Because they have the most deeply ingrained neurological routines.
Exactly.
But wait, we're only talking about cognitive fatigue so far.
Yeah.
Like analyzing data, reading files, following procedures. A DSL isn't just absorbing data. They are absorbing human distress. I mean, they are basically the designated sponge for a school's trauma, handling emotional disclosures, panic attacks, family crises.
And this brings us to the source's fourth core insight, which is where the job of a safeguarding professional diverges sharply from freight transport.
How so?
Emotional labor accumulates. A truck driver's fatigue is physical and cognitive. A DSL faces those, plus the profound weight of emotional transfer.
Because humans naturally mirror emotions, right?
Yes.
We have mirror neurons designed to make us feel what the person across from us is feeling. If you sit in a small room with a terrified, crying teenager, your own nervous system reacts.
Your cortisol spikes.
Yeah, you are physically taking on a piece of that emotional weight.
And that constant relational responsibility has a measurable cumulative cost. The source points out that absorbing this trauma daily leads directly to compassion fatigue.
Which is so dangerous.
It is. The insidious part of this specific type of exhaustion is that it happens while staff appear outwardly perfectly capable.
Right. They are showing up on time, wearing a professional outfit, leading the morning assembly. No one would even know.
But internally, the empathy reserves are entirely drained.
That's a great way to put it.
When a truck runs out of diesel, the engine shuts off and the truck stops moving. It's very obvious. But when a human runs out of emotional fuel, they often just keep going.
They just start treating complex, fragile human crises as mechanical, logistical tasks just to survive the day.
They focus on compliance rather than connection. Like, did I fill out the form? Yes. Did I send the email? Yes. But they lose the deep empathy required to actually read between the lines of a child's distress.
And a child's safety often depends entirely on that professional's ability to remain highly sensitive to nuance.
Absolutely.
So we arrive at a really practical wall here. If the core problem is that people literally do not realize their judgment is slipping because their brain is actively hiding their fatigue from them to keep them moving, how do you solve it?
It's the million-dollar question.
Because you cannot just send out a staff memo saying, hey guys, please prioritize self-care and try not to be so tired.
Right. That does nothing.
That's like looking at a smartphone with a battery at 1% and telling it to just try harder to keep running a really heavy application.
Right.
It just ignores the hardware reality.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, relying on the self-awareness of an exhausted person is a flawed strategy from the very start.
So what did the transport industry do?
Well, we have to look at how they solved this exact same problem. They didn't cross their fingers and hope drivers would pull over when they felt sleepy.
Obviously not.
They instituted systemic mechanical solutions. They implemented strict rest regulations, mandatory breaks, and crucially, they used tachographs.
Okay, for those listening who might be unfamiliar, a tachograph is a device installed in commercial trucks that physically records driving time, speed, and distance. It is an objective, third-party measure.
Exactly. It removes the subjective element entirely. The tachograph essentially says, I don't care if you feel perfectly fine and want to keep driving. You have been behind the wheel for 10 hours, and legally, you must pull over now.
But the safeguarding world doesn't have electronic tachographs to plug into the back of a teacher's neck.
No, thankfully.
So the source argues for the absolute necessity of creating systemic equivalence.
Right.
What does a human tachograph actually look like in an office environment? It has to be a system that doesn't rely on the DSL raising their hand and saying, I'm overwhelmed, because, as we established, their autopilot brain is telling them they're totally fine.
Well, a strong system assumes the fatigue is already happening.
Okay.
A human tachograph looks like mandatory scheduled case supervision, where professionals are required to talk through their decisions with a neutral third party.
Almost like an audit.
Sort of, yeah. It looks like forced peer review on Fridays, or rotating safeguarding perspectives so that a fresh pair of eyes is constantly looking at a familiar, long-standing case.
That breaks the autopilot.
Exactly. It forces team decision-making, so a single, potentially exhausted prefrontal cortex isn't carrying the sole burden of a high-stakes judgment call.
It could even be structural barriers.
Right.
Like hard shutoffs for email servers at 6 p.m., preventing staff from quietly accumulating cognitive load off the clock.
Yes, which is a massive paradigm shift.
It completely changes how an organization views time off. There is a line from the source that defines this perfectly, I think. Rest is a safety intervention, not a weakness.
That is the ultimate strategic reframe. Strong safeguarding systems must recognize that exhausted professionals actually become safeguarding risks themselves.
Not out of malice.
No, just out of depleted capacity. The document drives home that sustainable safeguarding fundamentally depends on sustainable professionals.
You cannot build a robust safety net for children out of frayed, snapping threads.
Perfectly said.
So what does this all mean? We have these systemic guardrails, and the metaphor of the long-haul truck driver is really illuminating for understanding how fatigue compromises our hardware.
It is.
But I want to play devil's advocate and push back on the limits of this comparison. Because at the end of the day, pulling a truck over to the side of the road to sleep is logistically simple. You turn off the engine, you pull the curtain, and you sleep.
True.
The cargo in the back of the truck doesn't care that you stopped.
Yeah.
But a DSL is dealing with living, breathing human beings. You cannot just apply a handbrake to a family that is actively falling apart just because your shift has ended.
This raises an important question, and actually the author is highly aware of this limitation. They address it in a section titled, The Honest Bit.
Oh, I love that title.
Yeah, the source clarifies exactly what DSLs must not take from the analogy. Because safeguarding is not mechanical transport work. The comparison serves to illustrate the biology of fatigue, but it fails to capture the complexity of the intervention.
Right, because transport safety is about route management and avoiding collisions. Safeguarding is about wading right into the collision and trying to piece things back together.
Exactly. Emotional labor requires a level of relational sensitivity that goes far beyond just staying awake and keeping your eyes on the road. A trucker just has to not hit the car in front of them.
But a DSL,
A DSL has to actively build trust, navigate hostility, interpret trauma, and nurture a fragile human life.
which means the burden of solving this cannot rest solely on the individual DSL trying to manage their own sleep hygiene.
Yeah.
I mean, if the job itself demands an unnatural level of emotional output, the organization has to step in.
And that brings us to the final focus of the source, which is a direct challenge to the leadership layer of these organizations.
What is the challenge?
Building a culture that protects students is merely the baseline expectation. A truly excellent, sustainable organization builds a culture that aggressively protects staff capacity.
Aggressively protects it.
Yes. Leaders must ensure that their staff are not expected to maintain endless, low-level vigilance without structural recovery.
The source advocates for something called well-being literacy. I found that fascinating.
Yes. Well-being literacy goes way beyond generic wellness programs. It involves teaching staff the actual neuroscience of their own emotional fatigue.
So not just yoga on Fridays.
No, exactly. It means training a professional to recognize that when they suddenly feel cynical about a student's tears, that isn't a character flaw.
It's biological.
It is a biological indicator that their empathy reserves are depleted. It's giving them the vocabulary to establish healthy professional boundaries without feeling this overwhelming guilt.
Because ironically, putting those boundaries up is exactly what preserves their ability to do their job safely in the long run.
Exactly.
It is an incredibly powerful document, and it brings us to the close of today's deep dive. So let's summarize the critical takeaways for you listening. First, danger in high-stakes human environments rarely starts with a dramatic collapse. It begins with small lapses and a quiet biological exhaustion that basically masquerades as normalcy.
Right.
Second, familiarity is a trap. The brain optimizes for efficiency, breeding dangerous autopilot behaviors that strip away our professional curiosity.
We stop looking closely.
Exactly. And third, we cannot rely on sheer willpower to overcome our own neurobiology. Systems must step in to mandate rest and protect professionals from their own invisible depletion.
As we wrap up, I really want to leave you with the exact haunting question posed at the very end of the source document.
What does it ask?
It asks, how much safeguarding risk in my setting is linked not to poor intent or poor systems, but to exhausted professionals trying to carry too much for too long?
Wow. And to build on that, I want to leave you with one final, unexplored thought to mull over as you go about your week.
Okay.
Look around your own workplace, regardless what industry you are in. We operate in a world where our organizations almost exclusively measure the output of our work. You know, how many cases we closed, the volume of emails we processed, the number of meetings we somehow survived.
Always the output.
Always. But they almost never measure the invisible depletion of our cognitive and emotional reserves. So if we are only ever measuring the output and completely ignoring the drain on the battery, are we accidentally engineering our own future failures?
That's a great point.
How might you, in your own life, in your own high-stakes roles, build a personal tachograph?
I love that idea.
How can you find a reliable, objective way to measure your unseen fatigue and force yourself to pull over long before your professional judgment begins to drift off course?
It is a question worth answering before the road runs out.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. Take care of yourselves, and we'll catch you next time.